Now that the very well-established theory put forward by George S. Alexander and Natalis Razin is attracting global attention as the prime location for the fabled Atlantean Empire, we thought we would share some info with you that may have brought about the cataclysmic destruction and end to such a civilization. Much is the case when considering such theories like the Eye of the Sahara being Atlantis. The answers always appear to be staring right at us in the face, and of course through the popularization of such evidence by Bright Insight, this too appears to be the case. The evidence is somewhat overwhelming to such an extent that it is almost an insult to the researchers at this point to even question if they are in fact 100% correct. And of course, they very well may not be, but there isn't really any other locations that so closely matches Plato's description, especially now it has been revealed that Herodotus too believed this to be the exact location of Atlantis. We have already published our video on this, and if you missed that, then check out the links provided. In this video, we are going to point out some other interesting things that could give an answer as to what happened to the great empire of the Atlanteans in this region, and we are the first to make the connection. So wait till you hear this. The original story of the lost island of Atlantis comes to us from two Socrates dialogues called Timaeus and Critias, both written about 360 BC by the Greek philosopher Plato. Together, the dialogues are a festival speech prepared by Plato to be told on the day of the Panathenea in honor of the goddess Athena. They describe a meeting of men who had met the previous day to hear Socrates describe the ideal state. According to the dialogues, Socrates asked three men to meet him on this day: Timaeus of Locri, Hermocrates of Syracuse, and Critias of Athens. Socrates asked the men to tell him stories about how ancient Athens interacted with other states. The first to report was Critias, who told how his grandfather had met with the Athenian poet and lawgiver Solon, one of the 7 sages. Solon had been to Egypt, where priests had compared Egypt and Athens and talked about the gods and legends of both lands. One such Egyptian story was about Atlantis. Rather than exact reporting of past events, the Atlantis story describes an impossible set of circumstances which were designed by Plato to represent how a utopia failed and became a lesson to us defining the proper behavior of a state. This is how it is interpreted, but we believe it is an actual historical account. According to the Egyptians, or rather what Plato described, Critias reporting what his grandfather was told by Solon, who heard it from the Egyptians. Once upon a time, there was a mighty power based on an island in the Atlantic Ocean. This empire was called Atlantis, and it ruled over several other islands and parts of the continents of Africa and Europe. Atlantis was arranged in concentric rings of alternating water and land. The soil was rich, said Critias, the engineers technically accomplished, the architecture extravagant with baths, harbor installations, and barracks. The central plain outside the city had canals and a magnificent irrigation system. Atlantis had kings and a civil administration, as well as an organized military. Their rituals matched Athens for bull bathing, sacrifice, and prayer. But then it waged an unprovoked imperialistic war on the remainder of Asia and Europe. When Atlantis attacked, Athens showed its excellence as the leader of the Greeks, the much smaller city-state, the only power to stand against Atlantis. Alone, Athens triumphed over the invading Atlantean forces, defeating the enemy, preventing the free from being enslaved, and freeing those who had been enslaved. After the battle, there were violent earthquakes and floods, and Atlantis sank into the sea, and all the Athenian warriors were swallowed up by the earth. Atlantis has captured our imagination for centuries. The very thought of an ancient lost civilization that has now completely disappeared is one in which grabs our imagination. Our consciousness and our intuition are telling us there is more to this than just a story. Could the sinking of Atlantis, for example, have been that of an explosion near the eye of the Sahara, for example? If you look at these so-called meteor impact craters that are within 100 miles of the Richat, then the sudden destruction of an empire at this location does not seem so unrealistic. There is a blast zone that stretches for miles that some say was the result of something cataclysmic beyond rational thinking for this time period. If a meteor struck this location around the 12,000 years ago mark, then it would have indeed completely wiped out a civilization at the Richat. In fact, it would have desolated the entire region for thousands of miles. The crater Tinamur is a stunning example of an ancient cataclysmic event that occurred in Mauritania, and experts are baffled as to what exactly caused the crater. The 1.5 mile wide, almost circular crater Tinamur is located in Mauritania. The structure was excavated from a pinea-planed surface of Precambrian gneiss and granite that is covered by a thin veneer of young sediment. The present depth of the crater, measured from the top of the rim to the apparent crater floor, is about 100 meters. Earliest workers on Tinamur crater favored a volcanic origin. Richard Mollard referred to the presence of basalt lava and pumice and suggested a volcanic explosion. Alex was the first to propose an origin by impact, but failed to present conclusive evidence for this. The occurrence of a swarm of small dikes, supposedly comprising rhyodacite lava, intrusive into concentric fractures around the crater or outcropping just outside the crater rim, was interpreted by Monod and Pomerol as evidence for a possible volcanic origin of the structure. In 2002, an Italian team of researchers visited the crater and collected extensive material for a comprehensive geochemical investigation. They summarized these results. Besides some detailed photography of the melt rocks, these authors reported extensive chemical analysis, including major element REE and platinum group element PGE data for melt rocks samples and various regionally occurring lithologies. So they believe it to have been an explosion event and not a meteor impact crater. And get this, recent discoveries at this site have revealed a pyramid-type structure emerging from the center of the crater. Could it really be that there was a working pyramid at this location that somehow exploded and caused a devastating reaction to the rest of the surrounding area? It is long thought through the work and research of Christopher Dunn that the Giza pyramids were working power plants. In fact, it is the best explanation as to what the pyramids of this Earth actually are. If they were power plants and the crater at Tinamur was caused by an explosion on a cataclysmic scale by an exploding pyramid, then we must seriously consider what else are we missing regarding ancient and lost history. Of course, this is just being hypothetical. Of course, we are not suggesting there was a pyramid here for fact, any more than the Eye of the Sahara being Atlantis, but it is fun to speculate on such things, at least for entertainment purposes, if nothing else. When you look at the Richat on Google Earth, you see a whole section spanning almost 1,000 miles in width that looks like it literally slipped from the shelf straight down into the sea. This is unmistakable. Anyone who is anyone can view this and come to this conclusion. And when the ancient account states that Atlantis fell into the sea, it is hard to not make these further connections, especially in light of the other revelations that we are hearing about now. Could this crater at Mauritania really be the cause of such a cataclysmic event, an explosion of an ancient energy system just like what we see at Egypt? In Egypt, it is clear that this event reached them. We see scorching of internal chambers of the pyramids that we really can only explain if there was energy being generated here. We see debris and ruins in Egypt where something happened to make them suddenly stop doing what it was they were doing, an event of cataclysmic proportion that destroyed Atlantis. If Atlantis really was the Sahara structure, spreading for thousands of miles across the region, then it is more than probable that the crater Tinimer had a major part to play, causing an enormous landslip that seen the empire washed into the sea. The landslip caused a huge tsunami of biblical proportions that swept across the entire region and inevitably affecting the entire planet, sending humanity back to a survivor state until we eventually began rediscovering these areas around 5,000 years ago, upon which the survivors tried to document the ancient events that we are still ignoring today that they even took place. What do you guys think of this anyway? Is it in line with other discoveries in Mauritania? The evidence just keeps stacking up. It's hard not to see this as the ancient site of Atlantis, especially when it seems to match age-old accounts and even modern-day evidence. Comments below as always. Thank you for watching.
Atlantis, when sunk by the earthquake, became an impassable barrier of mud to voyagers sailing from hence to any part of the ocean.
As we all know, earthquakes can cause tsunamis, and tsunamis regress, leaving behind nothing but mud. Here we learn from Plato that Atlantis had turned into a mud barrier, impassable by ships. To date, it has been difficult to make sense of this statement, but if we consider that the empire was hit by an earthquake, washed over by an enormous tsunami, and buried in mud, which became the dry sand of the Richard, then this statement makes a lot of sense. The Atlantic regressed, and the entire city may not have sunk away under the waves, but was destroyed and covered by the mud of the flood. Perhaps it was the Great Flood, known to all cultures in some way.
Could it have been the site of the fabled city?
What could this place have been during the days of Atlantis? And if it was Atlantis, how did the sea regress or the land rise? The two main possibilities are tectonic movement and volcanic activity. The entire western seaboard of Africa sits on a shifting tectonic plate, and it's very possible that this shifting is raising the land, as the evidence of the shells in inland Mauritania indicates. If we were to go back 12,000 years and the land was 300 meters lower, the entire area around the Eye of Africa would be an island in the Atlantic, the main island of Atlantis. The water would fill the rings of the Richard, leaving the grand terraces of land, the design of Plato's Atlantis. There is evidence of volcanic activity in West Africa. Only about 500 kilometers off the coast of Mauritania lay the volcanic islands of Cape Verde and the Canary Islands, which give clear evidence of volcanic activity in the area. This could have aided to the rise of land within the last 12,000 years.
We needed to go back to the finer details in Plato's narrative to see if any evidence on the ground could link the Richard to the legend.
The god Poseidon found no difficulty in making special arrangements for the center island, bringing up two springs of water from beneath the earth, one of warm water and the other of cold.
We found it interesting that the locals have dug a well in the center island that provides water, and an oasis is formed around it, even though it is in the Sahara, one of the driest places on earth.
And incredibly, unlike the wells in the area that produce salt water, this one produces fresh water.
The country immediately surrounding the city of Atlantis was a level plain, itself surrounded by mountains which descended towards the sea. This part of the island looked towards the south and was sheltered from the north.
The Richard is surrounded by a plain, sheltered by mountains towards the north and open towards the south, just as Plato described. Natalis and I were convinced that we were walking on the same landscape as detailed by Plato.
The surrounding mountains of the city flowed with rivers.
The desert we see before us today once looked very different. Science has confirmed that the Sahara was once lush and fruitful, an area rich with vegetation and flowing with rivers and streams. We can still see the scars of the riverbeds on satellite imagery, which flow down the mountainside towards the Richard, but most of them have dried up completely.
There were a great number of elephants on the island.
In and around the Eye of Africa, we discovered a variety of animal remains. In particular, we were shown elephant teeth near the Richard. These finds are proof of a time when the land was grazed by large animals like giraffes and elephants, as the rock paintings near the Richard confirm.
Could this have been Atlantis?